One quick note before we get started. Adam Rank of the NFL Network was scheduled to join us on this episode of Bearlissimo, but was unable to join us. He is fine. No worries. He was just too busy to join us and has rescheduled.
The following program is suitable for all audiences.
Let's let this hard work pay off. Let's cut it loose, ball out, let's put a lot of freaking points up on the board. Let's go. Every day we improve, right? Yep. Reset, job not done. Yes, sir. Play by play, next play mentality. Gotcha. Love you, bro.
I want you to take a second to think about everything every one of you gave up to be in this position right here. I don't care what you did, you had to give something else to have this opportunity. So take advantage of it tonight. Play ball like you love it. Here we go.
Come on, boys. Let's eat up, man. Get it.
Like we talked about earlier this week, it's the opportunity for us to stack this game. Let's go ahead and execute and be the playmakers out there. Let's go. Playmakers on three. 1, 2, 3. Playmakers. Yeah.
I'm going to challenge you right now for greatness. Yes, sir. You got me? Yes, sir. You take this thing over right now. Yes, sir.
All right, here we go. Trubisky throwing left side of the end zone. Catch is made. Touchdown Bears.
Attaboy! Attaboy! Great job.
Snap. Trubisky throws the slant right. Robinson's in the end zone. Touchdown! A well-executed drive puts the Bears in front.
Come on, boys. Keep it out. Demo, got a run, bro.
Bearlissimo.
Welcome to Bearlissimo, the George Bayliss Show. My name is Aldo Gandia. I am George's sidekick here, and I want to tell everyone from the Bears Barroom Radio Network to you, our loyal listeners, that we are thinking about you, and we hope that during these very trying times, we can provide some diversion, some respite from all of the stress and worries that we're all under, and hope that all of you people are abiding by the rules set forth by the infectious disease experts and are staying safe. Thinking about you. Now let me introduce George Bayliss. George, how are you, my friend?
I'm very well, Aldo. We're now in lockdown in the UK, so it's basically essential travel only. We are confined to our houses for at least the next 2 weeks. My family and I are still self-isolating, as obviously we believe, as we understand it, we've had the virus. We haven't yet been tested because only people who are in hospital are tested, but we've been confirmed as having several of the symptoms on the lighter end of the scale. But good news is we're mostly over that. We've been very fortunate. There are a lot of people out there who are significantly less fortunate, people who are fitter and more able-bodied than myself, and everyone should take this really, really seriously because this is scary. Certainly what we're seeing in Italy and Spain is absolutely shocking now, and that will happen both in the UK and the US unless we exercise social distancing and be, strict on it, and we start taking care of each other in a sensible way. So, just want to echo that before we get started. Make sure you wash your hands. Stay at home unless you absolutely can't. Take care of those that are near and dear to you, but also try and think about people who are maybe less able and less well than you are, because we can't just assume that someone's taking care of, our neighbours and each other. So let's all, as the Bears community, do it better than anyone else, it seems. So let's take care of each other and bear down until we're all through this.
Very well said, George, and I'm glad to hear that you and your family are feeling better. These are scary times, and it's really important that we adhere to what healthcare professionals are advising. All right, let's talk some Chicago Bears football.
Let's do it.
Where do you want to start, George? You pick a topic.
Obviously, we've seen a lot of people come in and we've seen a lot of people go out. And obviously that's going to affect us not only in terms of depth on the depth chart for the Bears, but also potentially next year for compensatory picks, something that we've managed to turn one of those into a quarterback. I think you know my views on that quarterback before we traded for him, and I actually threatened Adam Johns, and I'm sorry, Adam, I'll apologise to you now. I was threatening to kick somebody in the nuts if we traded anything for Nick Foles and didn't get something back in return. So obviously that's my take on the Nick Foles trade. I think we'll leave it at that. He does have the potential to be a good quarterback, but I see it as wasted cap space, to be honest. I think it seems to be a theme that we're seeing is that we tend to be competing against ourselves. The positives we've got of Nick Foles trade, obviously convenience and knowledge of the system, the coaches, the offense, and some of the players that he's going to be playing with. He's got sort of, he knows that, and obviously he knows the NFC as well, so that's a positive. He seems to play better in pressure situations, but for me, he doesn't have the greatest of arms. He doesn't have great mobility. He's got a decent ability to see the field and to have the confidence to throw the ball. But for me, he's got limited athleticism, and the way that we saw our offensive line last year, and this is a subject for this year's free agency for me, is that we don't appear to have done anything to have strengthened the offensive line. In fact, we've lost players from it. And all we have done is pick up Coach Castillo, who is an excellent coach, and I think will make some difference. It remains to be seen what kind of difference that's going to translate to on the field. And also, potentially, it's going to point towards, and this is going to be a theme of the show, Aldo, if you don't mind, is it's going to point towards where potentially we might be going with some of the picks that we do have left. Obviously, in terms of compensatory picks, one thing I would like to mention to the listeners, and it's interesting to note, is that obviously with Leonard Floyd, we picked up the fifth-year option. Last year, we did it early, something that we haven't done this year with Mitch Trubisky. Obviously, there is still the option to tag people at the end of that year if they perform well, and you at least get some sort of bargaining arrangement for the next year. Even if you rescind that or if you trade someone on that franchise tag. So we didn't do that with Floyd. And what we ended up doing was releasing him, because you can't rescind the fifth-year option. You end up releasing the player, and he goes on and signs what for me is a bonkers deal, but $10 million for 1 year, possibility of earning $30 million. That could have translated into a fourth or potentially third round compensatory pick. But obviously we've lost that because he's a player that's been released. And that's something that we've done, Aldo, as I'm sure you've seen. A lot of the players we've picked up are players who have been cut from elsewhere. I mean, what's your observations on that?
I am just so confused with the direction of this team. Ryan Pace comes into the general manager position, and he says he's going to build through the draft. And because of failures in his draft selections, he's now having to make these free agent acquisitions and drop players that were supposedly part of the nucleus of this team, and therefore, the entire squad is a mess. It's a hodgepodge of thinking, and yet, as a Chicago Bears fan, there's always a part of me that hopes that this is going to work out, that these moves are going to equal a championship. But the better part of me, the more rational, logical part, I think that this franchise is a mess.
I'm inclined to, and I want to stay positive as we can, because obviously it's the off-season. We've got a long way to go before we, even with the coronavirus as it is, before we see any kind of football.
Right.
So there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of opportunity there to actually make changes in the roster and for things, to happen either organically with players working on their own or actually with the coaches themselves in the future, which is going to change and affect things. But you are right, is that the one area where Ryan Pace really has failed, and that there is no other word for it, is in those first round picks, and we touched on that last week, where he seems to be going for athletes over production. He seems to be going for traits over abilities, and that's something that we seem to be doing. And obviously what we then do, you've hit the nail on the head, these guys are leaving through one way or another, whether it's most of them have been cut, haven't they? Most of them have been released, and we've been picking up vets and free agents at slightly inflated prices compared to what we would have had and this is the thing with Trubisky. I mean, obviously Trubisky on this year is what, 7 million, around the 7 million mark in cap space,
right.
And yet we have now someone who's going to be competing with him at 15 point something million for the first year in Nick Foles, with him having a potential out if he balls at the end of that 1 year. So it smacks of desperation in some respects. It seems to be a little bit sort of spray and pray in terms of trying to fill the gaps that we've created ourselves through bad drafting and through releasing players. But the positives are, and it's the only positive we've got to hold on to, is that we now have at least an offensive staff who seem to have a history of working together with great results. Coaches who have shown an ability to elevate the play of the players that they are coaching, so to take play pieces that weren't what they became and to elevate the level of play from those players. And that's what we have to bank on, I think, as Bears fans this year, is that in 1 year, in short order, these coaches are going to assimilate through that familiarity. They're going to take the players and develop them, and we're going to see an uplift in the level of play from what we already have on the squad. The hope is that Ryan Pace seems to make hay in between rounds 2 and round 7, and that's where we have our picks. I mean, admittedly, 2 2s, a 5th, 6th, and 2 7s. Mm-hmm. So we are limited in terms of draft capital because of trades that we've made. Arguably, the Khalil Mack trade, as great a player as Khalil Mack, and he is, and I'm not going to doubt that, that money could have been spent on several free agents that might have made a greater impact than just one excellent player on the edge that teams can neutralise with 2 or 3. I think we're going to see the best of Khalil Mack this year, if I'm being honest. Mm-hmm. So long as the defensive line can stay fit and Robert Quinn can stay fit, I think we're going to see a massive change in terms of the ability of Khalil Mack on the field. And also the defensive linemen are going to get a lot more hay to chew on than they had in previous years, because I don't think that now that there's that many people on our defensive line, either in a 3-4 or in the nickel defence, in a forefront, that you're going to be able to single. I think everyone that we can line up there as starters are going to be exceptional players, not just sort of good or average or above average. I think they're going to be on that level of being exceptional. So that's obviously a positive to take for a defence. We've got some positives on offence in terms of coaching and their ability to elevate players, and that's what I think we have to hold on to at this point. And obviously we're now going to look at, who's gone, who we've brought in. Okay, so let's get on to the big ticket guys that we've obviously picked up. Obviously a trade, Nick Foles, quarterback coming to the Bears. We've already touched on that. Robert Quinn, we've touched on. Jimmy Graham. A lot of people are moaning about Jimmy Graham and have got a downside on Jimmy Graham. As we talked on last week, we have guys who are ex-basketball players on the roster who are, I think, going to be improved by the fact that we have a Jimmy Graham on the roster. I did a thread on Twitter, Aldo, and I don't know if you saw it, but I looked at the historic production for Green Bay tight ends, mm-hmm. and I looked at the historic production of Chicago Bears tight ends. And Jimmy Graham is in decline, as most people would say. He's getting older. He's not the player he was at either the Seahawks or at the Saints. I think that we can all agree on. Well, what that did show me, and obviously stats can only show you so much, you have to look at who the player is on the field, is that his production at Green Bay was as good as it's been for 7 or 8 years. They've had no one at the tight end position produce more than he has in his 2 years at Green Bay. So whilst we're talking about the decline of a player, we've also got to look at the change in offensive scheme that they've had, changing over to the new head coach, and that offensive scheme that came over partway through that deal. We've also got to look at the fact that historically that franchise, under Aaron Rodgers' stewardship, and it's Quarles. I don't know if you remember Quarles, the tight end at Green Bay.
Andrew
He's
Quarles.
The last.
Yeah.
Andrew Quarles, yeah. He's actually the last tight end, not Jermichael Finley, Andrew Quarles, the last tight end for the Packers who actually had more yards or touchdowns in a season than Jimmy Graham has in either of his years. Well, certainly his first year at Green Bay Packers. Obviously last year was a down year. You have to marry that, and then you also look at the Bears' position. You've got to go back to Martellus Bennett to look for a tight end who's had better production. Trey Burton has in 1 year, Martellus Bennett has in 2 years with Jay Cutler. So when we're looking at production from tight end and we're talking about a player who's on his downside, I see the positives in this move with Jimmy Graham. The fact that he was cut is not going to affect the compensatory formula. The fact that he brings a lot of experience to position in that room. The fact that he's an ex-basketball player who's done that transition to the top level of football at tight end, and he's going to be able to work with, is it Demetrius Harris and Darian Clark? I think it is it? From memory. Anyway, someone will correct me, no doubts. I think that's where we're going to see Jimmy Graham. He's going to be the vocal leader in that tight end room. He's going to be the people that, Trey Burton has had a lot of pressure on him to be the man in that tight end room. And I think it's affected him. And, I think, I'm not sure, but if we were to ask him and he to be candid, I think that would be that weight of being the top ticket free agent in that room and being the guy that we have to rely on, as he's always been sort of a bit part player in that position at the Eagles. I think that has had an effect on his play.
Just comment a little bit more about Jimmy Graham, because there's a lot of talk in the chat room about Graham and how much he has left. And you talked about the Packers' offense, and it's not tailored towards the tight ends. That for about 2 or 3 years, Richard Rodgers was their starting tight end, who was probably the slowest tight end in the history of tight ends, and it just didn't seem to have the players. And so perhaps Adam Rodgers went away from relying on the tight end position. And the expectations were that when Graham joined the Packers, he was not going to put up, the type of numbers he had at Seattle, but nonetheless those numbers should have been significantly better than what we saw. So tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on Graham.
Yeah, well, I mean, Jimmy Graham, he's a less athletic version of himself. He hasn't really declined in his abilities in terms of what he gives us in the room. One thing you get with vets, and this is the positive that you get with vets, is you get savvy. So whereas previously you might have relied more upon your athletic gifts and abilities, sorry about the noise in the background there,
okay.
Whereas you might rely upon the gifts, the athletic gifts that you have, and try and eschew that into what you are able to produce on the field. A tight end needs a lot of craft if you're going to be very successful at position. You need to know, and this is the one thing that we said when we're scouting Bryson Hopkins, is you need to know how to release from the line of scrimmage. You need to know how to leverage. You look at the leverage at the defensive back, or if it's in nickel, or if it's a linebacker that you're one-on-one against, or you might be split wide against a cornerback. And you've got to look at what your gifts are as a player and your abilities, because you're not necessarily, as Jimmy Graham now, you're not going to be able to outrun a cornerback. You're not going to be able to potentially outrun a defensive back. And there are some linebackers you're going to struggle to outrun at the age that he is. But what he is able to do is to use his body in ways to sort of set people's hips up, to turn them against themselves from where he wants to go. He's able to use his hands very effectively away from the line of scrimmage. There's no wasted footwork in any of his route running. He's very clever at setting people up on his routes. So yes, he might not sprint a 4.6 40 at the size that he is anymore. He might be around about the 4.8 mark. But the thing is, if you are able to you turn a defensive back's hips against where you're going with the route, you give yourself a yard to a yard and a half. And for a quarterback who can read that and knows where the route's going and sees that leverage and he sees the savvy there, he's going to release the ball early. As you're making your break, the ball is already on its way. You cut inside, you've got 2 yards of space. And the one thing we did see, I think he was ranked 6th among tight ends last year in terms of his yards after the catch as tight end. So he actually did pretty well in that stat last year with the Packers. It's one of the stats that I think Robert Schmidt's put out there. That's what you get with Jimmy Graham, is you're going to get all of that savvy, you're going to get all that nuance, all of that skill, all of that crafting, being able to read the coverage. Is it a zone? Am I in man? Are they robbing this route? All of that sort of savvy he's able to translate on the field, and it's evidenced through his play. And he's a dependable third down target, he's a dependable red zone target, and that's where the Bears were awful last year in terms of red zone percentage in the NFL as a whole, particularly bad. And that's where, if we turn, I don't know, let's say conservatively 5 field goals inside the red zone, if we turn 3 of those into touchdowns, we win another 2 games at least. And that can be the difference between missing the playoffs and making the playoffs. So yes, let's all be cognizant of the fact that Jimmy Graham isn't the athlete he once was, but he's still the player.
You know, I've been doing some reading, and one of the things I'm going to do this offseason is go back and look at tape from the Green Bay Packers of the last 2 years to take a look at Jimmy Graham's blocking, because, you know, like everyone that is poor at one aspect of their game, they get branded with that label for the rest of their careers. Jimmy Graham is not a good blocker, but some people have said that Jimmy Graham's blocking has improved tremendously since he's kind of lost that speed and knew that he had to rely more on being an all-around tight end. And so I'm going to go back and take a look at the tape, and I hope that you do too, because your eye for that kind of stuff is much better than mine, and evaluate how well he is as a blocker as compared to, you know, how poorly he was when he was with the Seahawks.
Yeah, I think if you're expecting a tight end to take the better defensive ends of the league and to knock them 3 or 4 yards off the line of scrimmage, you're looking at Bradley Sowell or Brandon Maniuna. So we need to temper expectations, and this is the thing with tight end position. Having played it and coached it, you're not expecting a tight end to dominate a 3-4 defensive end. Let's say someone who's 6'4", 6'5", 260 plus pounds. You're not expecting them to blow someone like that off the line of scrimmage. What you want them to be able to do is to get position, hold position, and maintain. And if you can do that on the line of scrimmage, which Jimmy Graham can, you've done half the job, because you're going to get a tackle who's going to sort of chip and kiss, and you're going to go on to the second level. Can you then block in space? So we've got away from the line of scrimmage now. We know that Jimmy Graham can get position, he can hold position, and he can give plenty of effort. That's as much as you can hope from most tight ends in the league. The Kittles of the league are very, very rare and few and far between. So you have to temper the expectations as to the level of blocking you're going to get from a tight end, in my opinion. So let's be realistic and then look at what Jimmy Graham does once he's gone on from that first level into the second level. There were Green Bay Packers videos last year. Oh my God, it sickens me to say those words, Aldo, Green Bay Packers. But there we go. There were some videos last year that were shared by Bears fans that were actually specifically talking about Jimmy Graham's blocking. And in space, he is an effective blocker. He's able to get position. He knows how to ride a player in terms of where they're trying to go, is to use his body, to let them go the side that they want to go, knowing that a running back is going to cut inside. He then has the position. He holds and maintains a position. This is the savvy that I'm talking about. He shows that in his downfield blocking. So for me, it's a much maligned misnomer in some ways in terms of what people expect from a tight end in terms of blocking. You can have a great blocker, but you're going to sacrifice elsewhere, generally speaking. Like I say, George Kittle is very few and far between. Bears could have had him in the second round, but, it is what it is, and he is where he is. And I think he's a better blocker now for having been on the 49ers. Let's not pretend as well that Clancy Barone wasn't also an offensive line coach in his history. So he knows how to get people to block and to be effective downfield. He's also coached people like Algie Crumpler in terms of receiving downfield. So let's not be ignorant of these facts. In that these coaches that we've picked up, and tight ends, as we've already heard by speaking to both Bryson and Joey Magnifico in the Bearlissimo series, one of the other things that we know is that the tight end will spend some of the time with the offensive line room, some of the time with the receivers, and obviously the tight ends coach will sort of join in with both of those bits. So that's something that the Bears are going to be able to rely upon. Coach Castillo, Coach Baroni, and obviously we've got Mike Furry at the receivers position. Jimmy Graham, I don't think, needs to be told anything about route running. And he, like I say, Demetrius Harris, in terms of Darian Clark, thanks Tooch for his... it's Darian Clark, the guy that we had on.
That's right.
I knew it was Darian something, but Darian Clark, those are obviously former basketball players playing the tight end position that are going to benefit from Jimmy Graham being in that room. He's going to be able to give them that savvy, they're going to learn how to read the coverages, possibly even Trey Burton as well might benefit from him being there. So yeah, doesn't need to be an exemplary, an elite athlete. He has the savvy. He's got elite savvy. The guy's been doing this for years and years and years, and was, as we've already mentioned in this show, was one of the better performers at the tight end position at the Packers when he is so-called declined. So let's just be a little bit positive about that position, because I think with the coaching that we've got, with Jimmy Graham as an addition in that room, he's going to be a leader and almost a coach in the room that people are going to look up to, and they're going to be able to rely upon. Mitch Trubisky or Foles, whoever it is that starts, they're going to know that on third down, if they're even half open, Jimmy Graham is half open or Adam Robinson is half open, I'm going to be able to throw it up and they're going to be able to come down with that first down, because I know that they are going to be where they need to be, when they need to be, and 9 times out of 10 they're going to catch that ball.
That's for sure. That's for sure. I like your analysis of Graham, and I think most fans, their expectations are tempered, and so really, if we can get a half dozen touchdowns out of the guy, and he opens up the space for some of the wide receivers, then it will have been a good choice. And frankly, I think it was a move out of desperation. We all know the reports that were out there that the Bears were targeting Austin Hooper of the Atlanta Falcons, and when that fell through, they desperately wanted to land and needed to land a reliable tight end. And the one thing about Graham is that he has played all of his games with the Packers, so he's healthy, and so if he can suit up every game, that's at least something.
Availability is the what, Aldo? It's the best ability.
There you go. Well said.
Yeah. So,
George, I know you've done some work on the compensatory picks that could be available to the Chicago Bears based on the moves to date. Why don't you share that with us?
So people who would count against compensatory picks that cancel out what we've already had. The guys that we've got that would the projected value of the compensatory picks of the team that we picked them up from. So Robert Quinn and Artie Burns are actually the only 2 free agents that we've picked up that for their own teams would potentially net a compensatory pick. Obviously Robert Quinn would have been around about a 4th rounder, and I believe Artie Burns is potentially a 7th rounder, and those net off against the Nick Kwiatkowski deal with the Raiders. He signed an average deal of $7 million a year. I think in year 1, Robert Quinn's deal is $6 million or 6.5, around about those sort of figures. Nicholas Williams, who I think we should all congratulate as Bears fans. Obviously, he's going to net a 6th round pick, it's projected. Clinton Dix a 6th round pick. Chase Daniel a 6th round pick, possibly the most valuable contribution he's given to Bears fans. Is a compensatory pick on his leaving. Kevin Pierre, oh no, it's bitchy, I'm sorry. It's the worst in me coming out, Aldo. It's this cabin fever. I'm going to blame that and stick with it. Kevin Pierre-Louis, he's the one that nets off against Artie Burns in terms of compensatory picks that we're looking at. Cornelius Lucas wasn't enough to actually net anything, and neither were the signings of Barkevius Mingo or Jordan Lucas, the safety that we've picked up from the Chiefs. So those are the picks that we're sort of looking at, is potentially 3, possibly 4, 6th or 7th round compensatory picks next year. So that's something positive in terms of the way that we've conducted free agency. Yes, we've maybe overpaid on Jimmy Graham. Yes, we've done a trade for Nick Foles that potentially we didn't have to, and it looks like Cam Newton has been released today. That could have been a player that we might have been able to investigate at a cheaper rate with a more upside deal. You know, the fact that he wants to be able to compete for a role. The only places that he can look at now, I think, is the Chargers and potentially the Patriots. Patriots are saying that they're going to stick with Stidham, and they signed Hoyer. So it's going to be interesting to see where he goes to. But there's a potential, like I said there, that we've outbid ourselves, really, and that's a bit of a common theme that we see with Ryan Pace. But those are the nets for the compensatory formulas. Those are the players that we've brought in and the players that have gone out. So in terms of expectations, let's talk about expectations for this point, for this season on. We've had a significant amount of change on the offensive coaching room. That is going to have an effect, both positive, and it's also going to be different in terms of it's going to get people on edge. It's going to agitate players who are maybe a little bit comfortable and a little bit lazy and are happy with where they are in terms of where they sit in that sort of meritocracy within the organisation. It's going to agitate some of that. That, to me, is a positive. So let's look at that, but let's also be cognizant of the fact that this is the first year these coaches will have been working with Nagy. Hopefully Nagy has learned from last year and relies more upon people like Flip in terms of people like Castillo and Barone, Hopefully that's some of what we're going to see from the Bears coaching in terms of play calling from Nagy. I'd like to see him rely more upon those guys in the room, because I think they have equally savvy voices, and Bill Lazor obviously that's going to be able to add to that room. So let's temper expectations on offense. We need to be functional. We need to be able to run the ball better. We need to be able to give the quarterback a chance to show what they are, because I feel last year, and we've analysed it to death, and the debate still rages on Twitter and on Facebook and everywhere else that Bears fans meet, whether it's in the pub, shy fans in the stands, or socially distanced Bears fans. We can still find reasons to argue about the quarterback. So one of the things that we can do to help the quarterback is to block for him, to give him a running game, to give him an opportunity to actually be able to see the field and to be able to make decisions, which we talked about in the QB episode of Bearlissimo. Hopefully we see that this year with the improvement in the offensive line that I think Coach Castillo is going to bring. Touch wood.
Good stuff, George. Let's move on now and talk about roster spots on the team.
So when you look at the positions, I think this is, and where we've spent money in this off-season, I think you're going to see, it kind of points to where I believe that you're going to be able to see the Bears go in terms of where we're looking at in the draft. Obviously, the positions that we haven't yet picked up, offensive line, we haven't picked anyone up in offensive line. Guys that we've re-signed, Brent Urban, depth at defensive end. DeAndre Houston-Carsten. Jordan Lucas is a new person to the roster, but only $1 million deal, so it's a vet minimum deal. Barcavius Mingo is a special teams player at this point who might offer some upside as a situational pass rusher, but that's going to be limited. Dion Bush, familiar to the system, an in-the-box thumper, 1 year prove-it deal. But we still don't have a lot in terms of what we've added at safety. So there's still a spot for a strong safety there. We've got more than enough tight ends now to fill a lifeboat with. Or we can almost play like a formation just exclusively with tight ends at this point. We have 10 on the roster. So this is one of the things we've got. Okay, who have we lost? Clinton Dix, is that really a loss? Chase Daniel, ditto. Nick Williams, I think, is a loss, but again, I think we're in a good spot with some of the youth showed that they can play the position, and hopefully with a fit Akeem Hicks this year, that's going to help. Leonard Floyd, no loss there. Nick Kwiatkowski was depth anyway. I think we've got obviously the two young kids, Josh Woods and Joel Ayubinue, are still on the roster. Cornelius Lucas was a swing tackle who was mediocre at best. Very much a body leaner, wasn't particularly athletic. But again, that offensive line to me is now showing to be a clear need. We added very early on in the off-season Roberson at cornerback, and obviously we've now added the other Artie Burns, the former first-round pick of the Steelers. We've added him to the situation. Again, a young guy. He's only 25 still. Coming off his rookie deal. So there's opportunity there. Guys who have also returned, Isaiah Irving, depth at the outside linebacker position. Outside linebacker, we're looking a little bit better. I think JP Holtz has signed his. Patrick Scales has signed his. Aaron Lynch, bye-bye. Sherrick McManus has gone. Tyler Gabriel, Prince Amukamara. So that's who we've lost. So where does that point at the moment in terms of free agency to draft? Where are you thinking? Where is the chat room thinking in terms of where we're pointing at? Because at the moment, we've got Adam Robinson. Who do we have behind that as a starter at wide receiver? Okay, what about the offensive line? Who is going to start at guard? Who is going to be pushing Massey, who had injuries? Because we haven't even signed depth on the offensive tackle. We've brought guys who are backup type guys that, the roster, the camp bodies type level players we've brought in. It'll be interesting to see what we do there. But this is all pointing at where I feel we're likely to go with some of these draft picks. I mean, what are your thoughts, Aldo, on that?
Well, if I am the Bears coaching staff, as soon as I can talk to players, I'm calling Alex Bars up and saying, you are going to be competing for the right guard position. So whenever you're allowed to get back here into camp, be focused on that. That's where Juan Castillo is going to work you out at, because you are going to be in competition for that offensive guard spot and with anyone else that we pick up during the off season. Focus on being that right guard, because we have to have certain certain amount of continuity. We all know that the offensive line needs continuity. That's one of the building blocks of having a good offensive line. So if we leave James Daniels at the left guard position, if you leave Cody Whitehair at that center position, and then you go with Massey and Leno, and then you let Castillo do his job with those 5 players, that starting lineup, and you work on acquiring a swing tackle, you've got some depth there at the guard position, then, hopefully we can at least get to the offensive line that we saw in 2018 that yielded a Pro Bowl player in Charles Leno and was not a Achilles heel for this offense like it was in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, Rashard Coward is back, and hopefully he's going to be moving to tackle. The thing with guard, and again, without getting sort of too heavy on the technical side of things, it's easier to hide an athlete at tackle than it is to hide one at guard. Guard is a very nuanced position. You have to have great footwork. You've got to have a great anchor. You've got to be very savvy with your hands. You've got to have extreme strength, but you've also got to have decent speed. So guard position is much more difficult, I think, to fill with an athlete that you're trying to project at a position like Rashard Coward than tackle is. I think that's the reason why we put Rashard Coward at tackle, and I think that's the reason why is because he's got the length, he's got the long arms, he's got the strength, he's got the attitude, he's got the aggression. He's quick at the size that he is, so it's a little bit easy to hide at the tackle position, knowing that you can give help with the guard or you can give help with the tight end or a chip from the running back. That's a little bit easier to hide. I mean, we've hidden Bobby Massey and Charles Leno long enough, it seems. Although, people who watch the tape never lies will know that that's a little bit different in terms of hiding. Mm-hmm. Turning and sort of running up your own backside is not necessarily hiding.
George, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you make a really interesting point there that I'd like you to expound on. Is Rashard Coward throughout training camp? I was out at the 9 of the 10 public practices, and I never saw him play the guard position. He was being groomed to be the swing tackle position, and I remember tweeting out on more than one occasion that I've only seen Coward practice at the right tackle position, and it was to me extraordinary that he was being groomed to be that swing tackle position, but he only played the right tackle, and then once injuries beset the guard position, he was thrust into that right guard position and then was left there. So what do you think? Do you think that he should be moved back into that tackle position, which is where they initially thought he would play, or do you say to him, continue to work on that right guard position because that's where we want you to compete for the starting job?
I don't think it's something where you want him competing for the starting job at guard. What you might want him to be able to do is to be able to fill in spots at guard. So he has the best chance for me at right tackle, exclusively at right tackle, because the footwork at left tackle needs to be a bit cleaner and a bit tighter. In terms of the guard position, as I've said, it comes with a lot of savvy. It's the kind of thing that you can't just play a different position and then just drop into guard and hope that you're going to excel. I was one of the people that sort of petitioned for Coward to be put at guard, but it became quite clear quite early on that he was a little bit above his head in terms of what he was going up against, particularly in terms of the defensive interior, in terms of the skill and some of the techniques that he had to learn. It was just a bit too much too soon for him to take on. So that was one of the concerns. And like I say, there's a lot more to it than people would believe, and the positions are different. The one thing that I would say, Aldo, is that obviously we're talking about Coward going back to right tackle. I think that's where he has a chance of competing for a spot. He has the nasty, he's able to move people on his own, he's shown the ability to pull and wrap on the edge of the line of scrimmage, and to be able to hit people and drive them off the ball. All great stuff at right tackle. His footwork is a little bit easier for him in terms of making sure that he doesn't overstep. That's something that the footwork that Castillo drills time and time and time again into players is good footwork, good hip position, good hand position, good hand strikes. He works that constantly with his offensive linemen, whether you're a first-year pro, an undrafted free agent, or a Hall of Fame type tackle. He works those techniques all the time. That's something that's going to improve Rashard Coward at right tackle. There's a reason why we brought him back. Guard, Alex Bars obviously has always played guard. He's got the inside track on that right guard position for me. He showed him flashes in both the preseason and when he actually finally made the field. Good Lord, Nagy, you had an opportunity there in the last 2 games of the season to play him exclusively at right guard or tackle. That was a missed opportunity. But I think Alex Bars has shown more than sufficient upside on the interior and on the outside to be a piece that offers the Bears a lot of flexibility, along with Rashard Coward, a bit of flexibility in being able to play tackle and guard. I think you also get that with Bars, but exclusively to start at guard and potentially fill in at tackle if needed. He gives you that flexibility. But again, pointing to where these moves, or lack of moves as we have with the offensive line, where that points to in the draft for me is that we're potentially going to be looking at offensive tackle or interior at least one of those draft picks that we're going to be looking at. I think if we're going to have an opportunity to have someone who's going to compete for a starting spot, either at guard or centre or at tackle. The reason why I say guard or centre is because both Daniels and Whitehair can play guard or centre. So if we bring in a centre who's the best at the position, it means that we've got an opportunity to move both Daniels and Whitehair back to guard and have a centre who is exclusively a centre, is able to make all the calls, because that's clearly been an issue. Someone like a Tyler Biadasz, or whatever, Badass I call him, because that's how he plays, or Lloyd Cushenberry. So someone like that at the centre position, you're going to be able to sort of plug and play one of those type of players, put them into the spot. I think tackle is going to be one of the people that we're going to look at. I'm hearing now from what I see on Twitter and people I pay, have a bit of respect and deference to, are saying that Lucas Niang of TCU is likely to fall to the mid to late rounds off the back of injury concerns. Well, if he's there in the 5th round, that's going to be a name that we're going to have to consider in that sort of spot. But in terms of the 2nd round, I think one of those spots potentially is going to be a tackle. I think the other is going to be potentially wide receiver, because, like I say, those are the spots that at the moment we haven't yet added. Hopefully, DeMarcus Robinson is still out there, has familiarity, ticks the Kansas City box. He's played at Kansas City. He's had success at Kansas City. Matt Nagy, Kansas City. So hopefully DeMarcus Robinson is someone that they're paying attention to. He's still on the free agent market, so the likelihood is a prove-it deal might be out there for him on a cheaper deal, or one with escalators, or you could even potentially offer him something with an out if he excels, where you can get the cap figure down. But it's going to be interesting to see whether we go in terms of, I think there are still moves to be made. I think offensive tackle and guard now, as we stand in free agency, there's not a lot left at that position. Certainly nothing that I would look at and say is going to start over an Alex Bars, or is going to start over a Daniels or a Whitehair at that spot. There's nothing in free agency now at those spots that sort of screams out that there's going to be an opportunity for them to start. I noticed that Cordell Patterson today was petitioning Kelechi Osemele. If he's fit and healthy, he might be someone that you could get in at guard. He'd be a great shot at right guard next to like a Rashard Coward or someone like that. So we've got a question in the chat room there, Aldo, from Kostas from Greece, who's listening in live in Greece.
Yeah.
Do we think we should draft a safety instead of a wide receiver in the 2nd round? I actually think for the type of safeties that we're looking at, there's an awful lot of depth going even into the later rounds for people who can play either the nickel safety spot, so nickel back or safety, or can play in the box safety. You've got a good mix of those two types of positions. Quite a number of them in this draft. And obviously it's going to be wide receiver, running back, offensive tackle, is another strong position in this draft. Linebacker is quite strong. There's an awful lot of players that are going to be going ahead of safeties, particularly in the box type safeties. Antoine Brooks Jr., my favourite, my man crush at safety, yes. quite well known. He had a bad time at the combine for a guy who is up at the line of scrimmage, but he might have ran a 4.6, Aldo. But look at the amount of tackles he's made in the backfield. If he's there in the 5th or 6th round, you pull the trigger.
Absolutely.
If we move back in the 2nd round, you're going to be picking up extra picks. You pull the trigger with one of those picks. So whilst we're going to be 2nd round and then 5th round as we currently stand, I think there's a strong chance that there's going to be a quarterback that's still on the board that someone falls in love with when we're on the clock to draft in the 2nd round. I think there's going to be an opportunity for someone to potentially overpay us and give us some extra picks that hasn't picked up one in the 1st round, that wants to get back in and get a quarterback of the future, potentially in the 2nd round. I'm of the opinion that we can look at like a Cole McDonald later or a Mason Fine in undrafted free agency. One of those type of QBs would be okay as a developmental pick. There are also QBs who let's not forget. Every year there's quarterbacks on the market that become practice squad players. Now, if you have a spot for a 3rd quarterback and someone gets moved to a practice squad, you can lift them and put them onto your own squad, and they could be like 1st-year rookies that you're potentially adding to your spot. So we need to be a little bit more savvy with that with Ryan Pace. He needs to be a little bit cleverer in terms of picking people up of that nature. And again, those, because they're practice squad players, they aren't free agents, and you're not going to affect any compensatory pick formula that way. So rather than trading any more draft capital that we do have left, I think that's kind of the way that they go.
Hey, George, I got a question for you, and it's based on a tweet that was sent out by Lester Wiltfong. Always a good follow, Lester Wiltfong. He has listed the Bears' remaining free agents, and so I'd like to get your take on whether how much of a value do you put on re-signing these guys and bringing them back for at least another year, starting with defensive back Sherrick McManus.
I love Sherrick. I mean, he's been great value for the Bears, but I think the guy that we've just signed from the Kansas City Chiefs, I think is a direct replacement and significantly cheaper for Sherrick McManus. I think that decision's already been made, if I'm going to be honest.
Aaron Lynch, outside linebacker.
Hell no. It's not just a no. It's a hell no.
Bradley Sowell, tight end.
See the previous. I'm sure he's going to make 1 or 2 appearances on the practice squad at some point in the season potentially, but I think Bradley Sowell is done as an experiment at the tight end position. I think if he's sensible, he's going to bulk back up and stick to what he knows, which is playing tackle. He would be a decent, if he gets back up to the weight that he was, he would be a decent swing tackle to pick up. Yeah. But Aaron Lynch, no. Bradley Sowell as a tight end, no.
What about T.J. Clemmings, the tackle?
Well, we didn't see him.
We really didn't.
Very difficult.
That's right. Yeah, and he was in camp last season and missed a portion of camp with an injury to start camp out, and so he never really got going. But and when he was with the Vikings, the Minnesota fans I know were happy to get rid of him. So that's not saying much for TJ.
Yeah, I mean the thing is that he was quite a high pick as well. I think he might have been a 2nd round pick for them. But he was a high pick that they gave up on, and we, like I say, the tackle position, I think we've actually added some sort of sneaky, younger kind of guys to fill in the roster at that position. So that's something that we've already looked at, I believe. Like I say, I've not got the names in front of me because my computer seems to be just dying a death again on me.
Clemmings, by the way, was a 4th round pick, and I've got one more name for you, Ted Larson, the guard.
Ted Larson, he's past his best. I think we're better off going with a younger prospect there. Like I say, we're really talking about guys that are sort of filling in a bind kind of guy. He's not going to push for a starting spot, Ted Larson. I think we're better off using the roster spot for someone who potentially, with a bit of work, he's going to have that opportunity. Don't forget, we've still got Sam Mustafa at centre on the roster. We've got
that's right.
Yeah, we've still got Alex Bars. We've picked up a couple of young offensive tackle stroke guard type people. Like I say, I can't get access to them because my computer's died. But yeah, I mean, there are those kind of guys, and there's going to be more of those after the draft that are potential.
Absolutely.
That's one of the things that Ryan Pace always seems to do a good job of, is to be able to pick up those priority free agents that are in positions of value, that are going to be a little bit project or a little bit of an injury question, that are going to, as we saw with Bars, for example, had a quite significant injury in his senior year. Because of that went undrafted, but has shown to be a potential starter level talent at the guard position. Mm-hmm. There's always players like that every single year that for some reason, whether a medical red flag, an off the field issue, that a team just doesn't have. They have too much depth almost in a way at one spot, and they want to get rid of them and stash them on the practice squad. There's ways of getting people onto your team that at that depth level that we're talking about now. Right. I think there are better options out there than Ted Larson, if I'm being honest.
Harp 4803 has a very funny text on our chat room, but I'm not going to repeat it because this is our family show here at Bearlissimo Barroom Radio Network. So I'm just going to say, if you want to join us on Bearlissimo, any of our live shows, you should go over to Mixlr.com, Mixlr.com, and sign up. It is totally free, and you can find us by hitting the search bar and typing in Bears Barroom Radio Network. Go on, George, with your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where we are in terms of those guys in bringing them back. I think now we've done most of the job work we're going to do. And Brent Urban was a sneaky pickup that we re-signed him. I don't know if you saw that. He was solid at the defensive end position last year.
Yes, he was.
And he showed an ability to be able to sort of not only get a bit of push, a bit of decent edge setter. He was a guy that we picked up that was an interesting re-sign for me. So, there is... I think some of these spots are going to be picked up in the draft and in the priority free agency, get a little bit younger. We've picked up experience in free agency, and that's one of the things, again, looking at the moves he has made. He has picked up guys who are a little bit older statesmen, have been there, seen there, done it, got the T-shirt and the Pro Bowl and Super Bowl ring in some cases. So there are plenty of guys there that are going to add value in that way. I think this is where it's pointing to in the draft, and that's what I wanted to get across with this episode was most of the big stuff that we're going to do now has been done, and that was an edge rusher, which was sorely needed, which is going to make at least 3 spots on that defense, if not 4 or 5 if you count the corners and potentially Eddie Jackson. It's going to make their lives a bit easier having 2 guys who can get after the QB. So that's going to make a significant impact on defense. Jimmy Graham, I believe, whilst it's much maligned, a lot of people don't seem to be rating him. I am sold on his ability to get the other guys in the room better and also to be dependable on third down and in the red zone, which is 2 things that we really struggled with last year. What did we struggle with? Third down conversions that were third and long. We struggled with red zone percentage in terms of being able to score. Jimmy Graham helps both of those things. So, we can sort of be down on the Bears and we can be realistic as well. And I think there's space for both of those things. And for me, that's kind of where we're at in terms of this part of free agency. Most of the big deals are going to be done. Now is where we're going to see some potential value spots. Hopefully, we're able to re-sign Adam Robinson, extend that, and get that cap figure down for this year, which will make a potential for, let's say, Demarcus Robinson who's still out there. It'd be great to get him in the room and to be able to see what he could bring to that downfield threat, because like Shane has said and Phil has said and various other analysts on the network Draft on Tap, for example, Shy Fans in the Stands, all of those guys are excellent listens, and everyone should listen to this because you're not going to necessarily hear the same thing from any one of us. You're going to hear a different take from all of us, but it's all worth widening your perspective on where we're going as a franchise. And that's where, for me, where we're looking at the wide receiver position, it is an area of need. We do have Wims, we do have Calvin Ridley, who wasn't given much of an opportunity last year. We've got Anthony Miller. Is he fit with his shoulders? Going to be interesting to see. So we've got some decent receivers there. It's going to be interesting to see whether we pick up in what's left of free agency, like a Demarcus Robinson, for example. Robbie Anderson today has gone to the Panthers, and Matt Rule, former player at Temple, with him there. So the names are drying up a little bit. So Demarcus Robinson's the one that makes sense at wide receiver. So it's going to be the draft to me. I mean, like I say, we've got limited picks, so it's going to be a case of you're going to take the positions of value, and the big ticket positions are quarterback, offensive tackle, defensive end, cornerback. Those are the where you pay through the nose to get in free agency. So it makes sense to look at those positions as being like an extra tariff value when you come in to look at the second round. I think there are going to be people like Austin Jackson, potentially, offensive tackle out of USC, going to be great value in the second round, potential starter for years and years and years at left tackle. Prince Tega Wanogo. You've got Sadiq Charles from LSU. There are a lot of options there potentially at left tackle that are going to be there in round 2. Or you could go like an Isaiah Wilson from Georgia, who's just a road grader. You can plug him in at day 1 at right tackle probably. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be lots of options there for us in the draft. And it's a case now of, I would like the Bears fans that are listening and those who are sharing it and listening on the podcast later to start looking at the moves that we're making and widen your view as to where that's going to point to where we're going to look at in the draft, and then to start, looking at some of the names that you're hearing on the network, because we've been pointing at this for quite a while on the network, I feel, on all of the shows, as these being the potential positions. I mean, we spoke about it in episode 1, Aldo, where we kind of thought that we might be going in the draft and where we thought we kind of might be going in free agency. And so far, yeah, the names have been different, but the spots have been pretty much what we thought we were going to see.
What are your thoughts on trading down and acquiring more picks? Because my thought is that with round 2 can yield some plug-and-play players. Maybe not starters, but certainly guys that can play a significant amount of snaps in their rookie seasons. And trading down into the latter rounds to acquire picks, the chances of finding players that can contribute in a 2020 season, which is a season that the Bears have certainly, with their free agent moves, have said to us, we're going for it. We're going for the Super Bowl. We've added these veteran players like Jimmy Graham and Robert Quinn, guys who probably won't be playing for the Bears in 3 years. We're going for it now. So your thoughts on should Ryan Pace utilize those 2 second-round picks to find immediate contributors to this Super Bowl run, or do you think that if a trade offer is made that yields a third-round pick and a couple of picks for day 3, do you think Pace should pull the trigger on acquiring more draft assets?
It depends on who's there. I mean, it's a piece of string question. I mean, for me, the thing that you're going to see in the draft is there's going to be players that everyone talked about as being first-round players that are going to fall and fall and fall, right. And they're going to be in the second round. You're going to be looking at them, and other teams are going to be looking at them as well, thinking, oh, wow, he looks like really good value there. There's going to be, in terms of positions that we could have that we really do need potential starters on, who do we need starters at? We need a deep field threat, as we've mentioned, wide receiver downfield.
Right.
There are players that I was speaking about in October, Denzel Mims. Everyone was talking about him being like a 7th round pick. Now that he's being projected at pick 22, 23 in round 1. But that means that there's going to be other wide receivers. A T. Higgins, for example, a Ruggs, the Penn State kid. There's loads of guys that are going to potentially be dropping in. Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State. There's loads of receivers that are going to be dropping into that second round range that could start. Running back, we're probably not going to see one in the first round. If you had a Taylor there when the Bears run on the clock, you're going to get a back who's potentially somewhere between Adrian Peterson and Ezekiel Elliott for me. He's excellent in terms of what he did at Wisconsin. So, yeah, there were going to be players that you could, he could be a starter on the Bears. But equally, you could have someone who could compete for a position, but a higher tariff position. So, like I said, with a defensive tackle, with some of the other positions, like a defensive end, there might be a defensive end that drops, a Yeta Gross-Matos, for example. He might drop to the second round. If he's there, that's a guy that you potentially could get that's going to get you a lot of sacks. Mm-hmm. So it's a case of you look at that, and then you're going to have someone, if someone falls, you're going to have someone on the phone calling you saying, I want to get my guy, I'm willing to send you this, that, and the other. And as that clock drags on, everyone's seen draft day, or those that haven't probably need to have a look. You're going to be able to leverage, if you're sensible. Hopefully, we don't go the other way and Ryan Pace is bidding against himself for players in the draft. But like I said, that mid-round range, moving down with Whitehair, for example, the perfect example, picked up some extra picks that he turned into very good players. So it's a case that you've got to evaluate it based upon who's on the board at the time and what the tariff of that position brings as an extra. And realistically, offensive tackle, you might have the future of the Chicago Bears at offensive tackle that isn't necessarily going to start on day one, but they might start by the end of the season over Eleno or Massey. They might not start day one, but if it's there and you believe in them, you take it. So it really is a very open-ended question for me to hang myself with a take, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to resist the urge as much as it is for me to put something out there that people can hold against me for years and years and years in the future. I'm not going to do that because hopefully we're able to go live when we're on the clock or when it's coming towards the clock. If it goes. When that second day when we're coming up towards draft, if our name suddenly comes up we're able to go live, and we can do that projection there based upon what we've done in free agency, who's available still on the board, which teams are potentially with who's on the board, who might be wanting to trade with us, what kind of picks that might net us. We can make all of those that conjecture and that prognostication. We can do that on draft day when we're there, but at this stage we've still got a bit of free agency left. If we pick up a DeMarcus Robinson, all of a sudden wide receiver goes a little bit further down the list. If we manage to swing a trade for an offensive tackle for something that we've got on the roster that we're happy to get rid of, then potentially that goes down the list. These are all obviously hypotheticals, so it's a case of we've got to look at where we are at this point where we are ready to draft. We've got to look at what we've got left in free agency. But at the moment, the positions I feel that it points to is safety, potentially corner, offensive tackle, wide receiver, and possibly tight end. Like I say, there are some tight ends that I really like in this draft, and have made no secret of the fact that I really like. But equally, there's a lot of safeties that I've looked at and really like. And I think if you get an opportunity for an Antonio Gibson Jr., for example, out of Memphis, that'd be a name that a lot of people might not take. But if you can trade back out of round 2 and pick up a round 3 pick, and then potentially grab an Antonio Gibson Jr., that for me would be a win. You get an extra pick, and you're still getting a really excellent difference maker that you can use in multiple roles, both on offense and on special teams. So that would be what I would hope that Pace would evaluate and look at on as we're leading up to the draft. And he's, like I say, he's very analytical, so he's probably doing these hypotheses now in terms of who might draft, who might fall, where would that put us, what kind of player is going to be in that range, who is moving up, who is moving down, who is value. And hopefully we're doing all that as a franchise, because that's the way we're going to get better.
I am sold. I am sold, and I want to tell our listeners that tonight here on Mixlr.com, we've got Shy Fans in the Stands, and Greg Braggs and Joe Mandel are going to welcome ESPN 1000 radio host Tom Waddle, the former Chicago Bear. And if you ever watched Tom Waddle play for the Chicago Bears, you got to wonder how he can still speak so intelligently about anything, because that guy took so much punishment over the middle. He was one of my heroes as a Chicago Bear. You should, if you've never seen him play, you should go to YouTube and just punch in Tom Waddle. You're going to see some extraordinary tape of this guy single-handedly being the Chicago Bears passing offense. He is incredible. Also, Fat Mike is going to join them. If you listen to ESPN 1000, he's a freaking caller in on that show. So that should be a very entertaining Shy Fans in the Stands. And then tomorrow at a special time, it is the Mike North Advantage at 10 a.m. We're starting a little earlier. And then at night at 7 p.m. Central, it'll be Bears 100 Proof. That'll be the programming for the next 2 days. I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us here on our Mixlr.com, and those of you listening on podcasts and our YouTube channel, thank you very much. George Bayliss, the rest of the show is all yours. Take it away.
So, Aldo, you did an excellent job there introducing the rest of the shows. Let's not forget Draft on Tap and the original Barfly Tailgate Show. They're two excellent shows that you want to listen to if you want to widen your view as a Bears fan. You might not agree with all of us, you might not love us all, you might not even like what we've got to say, but it's always good to widen your scope and your perspective. So let's all take that in, as much information as we can as Bears fans, take it all together, move positively forward into the future. The future is uncertain, especially now with what's going on with this coronavirus. Stay safe, take care of the people that you care about, and let's look after each other and bear down.